Go live really quick. I got a pretty good question on my way home from work, and I've only now got a chance to dig into it. And this is coming to me from my old high school buddy Dave, who wanted to know. Let's see if I can find it better angle for the stupid camera. No, I really probably can't. All right, let's see what we can do here. This here. Yeah, my room's a mess. Gonna turn a little bit. This formatted. All right. So I've been doing some research, and as you know, I'm not a pastor or anything. I'm just a Jesus freak. So when I get asked stuff, like I only do videos when I get asked questions. So today's question was on the California gay ban because of a couple comments in YouTube or on Facebook. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to actually dig into, so I will pull up my specific request because I do like to be accurate when I'm dealing with folks. And again, this is a question from a friend. I'm trying to be just straight up and forward with him and give him the most accurate information I can. Of course, that means being accurate on both sides and not just on one. So that's really kind of a problem because in most days, people only want to listen to sources that they already agree with, right? Like I have some friends down in Twin Cities who are Gustavus Adolphus grads, and so they won't listen to anything from anybody who isn't already liberal, and I've seen many things, many people on the conservative side who do the same thing, which drives me nuts, because if you are going to be doing research, it really behooves you to get first person, information on both sides. So this is from my buddy Goob, who I've known since we were teenagers. Really good guy. So let's see. Explain, and so not starting a fight. Explain what is illegal in California. I saw your other post with a hypothetical story about much needed therapy, and it didn't seem like it fell under the bill. However, I'm still confused as to what is illegal about this guy making a decision for Christ and deciding he isn't going to transition. This is a response to something that the Daily Wire posted about a former transsexual who decided to dedicate his life to Christ instead of undergoing transition surgery. So the open question is, what does the ban say? And there's two of them, mostly because of time, and I have other things to do tonight. I'm going to read the most recent one, which is the Assembly Bill 2943. There is another one which was passed the year before, which basically says the same thing except for minors. And that bill is even worse. Okay, so in Act to amend sections 1761 and 1770 of the Civil Code relating to unlawful business practices. I'm reading this straight from legal info at .legislature.ca.gov. Right, so this isn't. I'm not going to focus on the family. They really bug me, right? I'm not going to Breitbart. I'm not going to Snopes. I'm just going straight to primary source material. The other thing you're going to hear me quote a lot is there's a really good article by the Brigham Young University Legal Review that talks about a lot of these issues, and it's an older article because it's about the ban on you're going to hear me say SOCE a lot. That's short for sexual orientation change efforts, because there's lots of different efforts, lots of different theories involved in the ex-gay movement. So that's kind of a big catch-all. That is the kind of technical term when you're talking about therapeutic or legal sense of the word. So we're going to get going from there. That's not the pop that I just opened. Where did the pop that I just opened go? I've been working up since 5 in the morning, so this is fizzling. This is the correct amount of Diet Coke. All right, so I've done a little bit. This isn't as much research as I'd like to do, but that'd be like a whole research paper in and of itself. So I'm going to do my best. So back to the bill text. Assembly Bill 2943, as amended, allow unlawful business practices, sexual orientation change efforts. Existing law, the Consumer Legal Remedies Act, makes unlawful certain unfair methods of competition and unfair or deceptive acts or practices undertaken by any person in a transaction intended to result or which results in the sale or lease of goods or services to any consumer. Existing law authorizes any consumer who suffers damages as a result of these unlawful practices to bring an action against that person to recover damages, among other things. That's what's already in the books. You can't defraud people. You can't, if you sell somebody gin and tonic and say it cures cancer and they die of cancer, their family can sue you, that kind of thing. That's a generally moral, upright, right? That's pretty normal. We do that kind of thing all the time. All right. Existing law prohibits, continuing on with the text, existing law prohibits mental health providers as defined from performing sexual orientation change efforts as specified with a patient under 18 years of age. Yeah, and that law sucks. I mean, it's a terrible law. It's overly broad. Just the quickest legal criticisms of the law. This is the first time in American history where a legislation has tried to say what a therapist can and can't try with a patient. All right, outside of committing an already existing crime, like you can't rape a patient, right? You can't drug a patient illegally, This is the very first time that a specific practice has been outlawed, and it's really bad law. It's incredibly bad law. But we'll cover a lot of it already going forward. So I'm not making multiple videos. This is not really what I want to talk about. But existing law requires a violation of this provision to be considered unprofessional conduct and subjects the provider to discipline by the provider's licensing entity. So on this, so basically what this means is, to break that down from legalese, is if you are a licensed therapist, and here's where most of the people, like if you just go to Washington Post or Snopes, what they're not going to tell you is that pastors are licensed under therapy laws, right? They're considered, like here in the state of Minnesota, pastors are considered licensed psychotherapists. So the arguments, oh, this doesn't ban Christianity, this isn't an attack on Christianity and traditional Christianity. Right? When I say Christianity, let me be clear in my definition. I'm talking about biblical Christianity, that which accords to the traditional Christian church, the confessions, that the Catholics and the Lutherans, and the Episcopals and the traditional churches have had in common since, the dawn of time. And the Jewish, and principles that like the Jews had before them for an extra 1,500 years, when it was codified in about 1400 by Moses. So 3,000 years of religious tradition. That's what I know you will find people who call themselves Christian who believe that they can, go against the Bible, but there's a passage, particularly 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, which says, don't be deceived, you can't be doing these things and be a Christian. Now, every time the Bible tells you, don't be deceived, that's because somebody's out there going to want to trick you. And that's either your own sinful nature, Satan and his companies, or this fallen world is going to want to say, oh, no, it's not entirely like that, when it is. So don't be deceived, the wicked, and it goes on to describe basically the sins of the whole world, but does include homosexual activity in that list. Nowhere is the temptation, is temptation itself listed as bad, but I'm tangenting, right? So when I say Christianity, that's the Christianity I'm talking about, right? The Christianity that's been around for thousands of years, not the Christianity that, in the 1960s decided that anything the Bible says that I don't like isn't actually God's word. And yes, before anybody goes in the comments, if you're part of the United Church of Christ, or the Evangelical Church of America, Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, or the American Episcopal Church, I get that you don't agree with me. I understand where you don't agree with me. I think you're wrong. There's not a lot to talk about here. But I'm here to talk about this bill, okay? So, but this comes up because, traditional Christianity, that the end of that passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, it ends, and such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were redeemed in the blood of Jesus, right? So the church in Corinth, probably the most sexually permissive, town in a society that named streets after sexual positions. Greco-Roman society was pretty out there and blatant about their sexual practices. they had people who had been living homosexual lifestyles and no longer were, right? This has been true of the church since there was a church. And if you're Roman Catholic, it was true of the church before there was a church in Rome. So, that's where I'm going from and when I define Christianity. So, going back to this one. So because pastors are licensed as mental health professionals in many states, this bill does specifically address them. All right. Now that's something you're not going to hear a lot and is not going to get touted. Right? Oh no, this is just for therapists, and they're not going to tell you that in terms of legislation, many states view pastors as therapists. Okay. So the existing law has already said, if you have a 17-year-old who is both, say, a Christian and has homosexual feelings, if they come to you, according to existing California law, you're not allowed to offer to give them any help. The only help you're allowed to give is to throw them into the LGBT movement, right? You're not allowed to mention choices about celibacy. You're not allowed to mention the programs and the ideas that have led towards sexual orientation change. You're not even allowed to mention that spontaneous sexual orientation change exists and is predominant, particularly among the bisexual population. We're going to get into this later. I got citations from actually a practicing therapist in California. This is going to be a long detailed thing, right? So moving back to the text, this bill would include as an unlawful practice prohibited under the Consumer Legal Remedies Act, advertising, offering to engage in, or engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual. It doesn't say when you're charging money. It doesn't say just when you're charging money. It doesn't say just in a professional clinical therapy. It says you can't offer. You can't engage in sexual orientation change efforts. That's incredibly broad and unspecific language. One of the problems with this bill, that makes it really bad law in addition to being immoral. And so let me address the immoral thing right here. So I'm old enough to remember, because I'm old like dirt, right? I'm in my 40s. And in my living memory, in the 1950s, for example, you could send a cop to a gay bar and he could arrest anybody who hit on him because homosexual activity was illegal. That's immoral, that's wrong. We got rid of that as a society, and we're a better society for it, right? But, why? Based on the libertarian principle of self-determination. I don't necessarily need to agree that what you're doing is moral to agree you have the right to do it. I don't smoke. I think smoking's stupid. I think it's wrong. I don't think that I have the right to tell you you can't smoke. I think it harms you. I think it causes you suffering. And why are you comparing it with actually California Senator Liu, who's the sponsor of this bill we're talking about, uses that exact analogy when he was arguing around the original bill. Here's the quote. Senator Liu on the already existing ban for youth. Senator Liu stirred particular controversy among conservatives. This is from the BYU Journal of Law, published in 2017, volume 32. I don't have the page number right in front of me. Senator Liu stirred particular controversy among conservatives when he was quoted saying the following: "The attack on parental rights is exactly the whole point of the bill, because we don't want to let parents harm their children. For example, the government will not allow parents to let their kids smoke cigarettes. We won't have parents letting their children consume alcohol at a bar or restaurant." Okay. So who's bringing the analogy of smoking or drinking and sexual orientation change efforts in? Senator Liu. All right, not our guy, your guy. And he's saying, since we can outlaw these harmful things, we can outlaw sexual orientation change efforts, which are harmful. If you want to view my opinion on the problems with men having sex with men as an activity, I've got 2 videos up, all covering the same facts, where I went to a pro-gay advocate medical facility and just listed their issues, right? They had a list. It was like a 10-page long list. If you are a gay man, these are the additional concerns you need to bring up with your doctor that other people don't have. And that list goes on, and I cross-reference it to the CDC, and you come up with things like men who have sex with men are 47 or 48 times, 42 times more likely to contract HIV, 47 times more likely to contract syphilis. Those are just the top two. 6 to 9 times more likely to experience depression, suicidal ideation, or attempt suicide. And this is not before you can bring the homophobia argument up. This actually cross-translates into a longitudinal study from the Netherlands, which is the most openly pro-gay country in in Europe. We're freaking Amsterdam, man. Okay. We're at 13. I was eating in a family restaurant in Amsterdam, and there was a XXX kitty porn shop right across the street. So let's not talk Amsterdam's this conservative repression machine. In Amsterdam, the most welcoming LGBT, pro-gay community in Europe, the achieved suicide rate among men in domestic partnerships, right, who had the holy grail of the homosexual life, was 6 to 9.5 times higher than their heterosexual complements. So basically, I had this whole video which went with, the disease rates are so much that that, for example, if you 20 years ago experimented, you can't give blood because it's so risky and it's so much more cost effective to just skip the testing, right? There's still a plasma and blood and organ donation ban on anybody for life who has had, for a man who's had sex with men across the country. And that's not because the American Medical Association is this big pile of homophobic bigots. It's because the disease rates and chemical abuse rates are so much higher in that community that they've decided not to bother. All right. So, as to the bill's first argument, what is and isn't allowed, and whether that's a good thing, give me a break, man. All right. One of the other criticisms of the young adult bill is it undermines the mature minor doctrine, right? So the mature minor doctrine is an American term. This is Wikipedia's definition. The mature minor doctrine is an American term for the statutory, regulatory, or common law policy accepting that an unemancipated minor patient may possess the maturity to choose or reject a particular health care treatment, sometimes without the knowledge or agreement of their parents. It is now generally considered a form of patients' rights. So this is a general principle. The mature minor rule was largely seen as protecting health care providers from criminal or civil claims by parents of minors at least 15. So any other medical procedure, sex change operation, an abortion, implanting an intrauterine device, anything else, if you're in medicine, if your child is 15 or up, they have the right to decide what therapeutic choices they want to pursue. All right, this is about freedom of choice, and it's about individual freedom. It is already illegal. You will lose your license and you lose your practice to try and force a therapy on somebody against their wishes, unless you have them committed, right? Unless they're already committed, they've been denied their freedom because they're a danger to themselves or to society, which takes a court proceeding, right? So barring committed individuals, you cannot treat someone against their will. That's already illegal. What this bill is saying is you can't offer them a treatment in any direction except the governmental approved decision. And that becomes particularly when you start looking at, further developmental psychological issues on this. For the quick one that's going on right now in 2018 is, as the transsexual debate, but upwards of 80% of young people, of minors who experience gender dysphoria, have resolved their gender dysphoria issues by the age of 18. Meaning, once you get far enough along puberty and your brain develops enough 4 out of 5 of those kids are happy and content and feel comfortable in their, in their birth gender, and the transsexual feelings have disappeared or resolved themselves. 1 in 5 don't. Interestingly enough, among the transsexual population, those who pursue the theory, this is a really, people have a lot of sympathy for the current, depression, suicidal ideation rate among that population is 40%. After sexual change, after coming out, after sexual orientation change, whether therapy or not, the suicidal ideation rate is like 39.5%. There's no change. So you've got a lot of social strife and a lot of medical expenses and a lot of trouble, something that clinically is not relieving the stress and the depression and the angst. So what you can't do, right? So if I were a pastor and I had a kid who came to me and said, "Pastor, I'm struggling with homosexual feelings, and I'm in California," because pastors are licensed as therapists in many states. You're in one of those states, and I do believe California is one of those states, and you say, well, in the Christian tradition, we have had people who have homosexual feelings and they either choose celibacy or they find a way to move forward, with heterosexual expressions, and whatever weak path we can find. Here are the people who have wrestled with it. Here's how they've resolved their issues. That's illegal, right? If a kid comes to you and asks, if now it was a kid, now it's anybody. If somebody comes to you and says, "I have homosexual feelings, I have religious morals, I have homosexual feelings, I would like to resolve this," it is now illegal to say that there's any option other than to embrace your homosexual feelings. So there is a moral evaluation being dictated, against a religion. Actually, it's against all, 3 of the most popular world religions, because Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all refuse to embrace, homosexual activity. So, the other problems is, I'm going to keep reading the bill. I'm just going to deal with the bill. It's too big of an issue. This is why I haven't been spouting off about it endlessly since it passed. I'm very upset about it, obviously. Let's continue to read the bill. Section 1. The legislature finds and declares the following. Contemporary science recognizes that being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender is part of the natural spectrum of human identity and is not a disease, disorder, or illness. Except that actively living homosexual, bisexual, the LGBTQ lifestyle is associated with higher incidences of drug abuse, higher reported incidents of domestic partner abuse, higher incidence of depression, higher incidence of physical violence, higher incidences of alcoholism, higher incidences of smoking, higher incidences of cancer, orders of magnitude higher incidences of sexually transmitted disease, barring chemical abuse, drug abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, sexual abuse, and disease being depending on the issue, 2 to 47 times higher among that lifestyle. If other than that, not a problem. And again, those aren't my statistics. I went to let me look it up for you, right? I'm live streaming. I didn't have time to do a term paper on this report, really, which is what it would need. All right. I've got the link in my Bruce the Monk channel. Strangely enough, I'm not enough of a narcissist that I have my apologetics channel already queued up whenever I turn my computer on. All right. Videos. Uploads, what Christianity is, what I get out of my faith, lectures on pornography, going through the Gospel of Matthew, 78 questions, and let's go by Sorry about the delay. Popular uploads. No, not the propaganda video review. Please, I don't want to talk about neo-Nazis. Create playlist, Masters questions, got that book. Man, I'm having a hell of a time finding this one. I do apologize about the delay, guys. Sort by most popular. Yeah. 4,000 views on my speech about, right? So, if you want to get the whole spiel when I break down all statistics, I've got a pair of views on compassion for homosexuals and the lifestyle of happiness. So, the organization in which I'm referencing is the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association's list for health concerns to be aware to bring to your doctor. All right, come out. All right, so these are, these are the most common issues of health concerns for gay men, just according to them. Number one, come out to your health care provider. That's perfectly valid. If you are living if you're engaging in homosexual activity, your doctor should know, because there's the following list of things that are involved. Number two, HIV and AIDS. 3, hepatitis. 4, fitness, quote, problems with body image are more common among gay men, and gay men are much more likely to experience an eating disorder such as bulimia or anorexia nervosa. Substance abuse and alcohol. Again, quote, gay men use substances at a higher rate than the general population, and not just in larger cities. These include a number of substances ranging from amyl nitrate to marijuana, ecstasy, and amphetamines. Long-term effects of many of these substances are unknown. However, current wisdom suggests potentially serious consequences as we age. If your drug use is interfering with your work, school, or relationship, your healthcare provider can connect to help you. They've completely given up on, with this population, they've completely given up on don't do drugs, it's bad, it's illegal, because they've lost that fight. STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, occur in sexually active gay men at a high rate. Prostate cancer, testicular, and colon cancer. Gay men may be at risk for death by prostate, testicular, and colon cancer. Tobacco. Gay men use tobacco at much higher rates than straight men, reaching nearly 50% in several studies. Tobacco-related health problems. HPV. Of all the sexually transmitted infections gay men are at risk for, the human papillomavirus is often thought to be little more than an unsightly convenience, but it's really bad, and they keep going. All right, so that's from the health professionals advocating LGBTQ equality, just their landing page. There's more from the CDC lists. But California has decreed that there is no problem to be addressed. So there, let the pro-gay medical associations sit and spin, because we don't want to deal with their facts. Okay, so the American Psychological Association convenes a task force on appropriate therapeutic responses to sexual orientation, in which they invited nobody who engaged in the process, nobody who had engaged in the process, no impartial psychologists, and only activists opposed to the process to sit on a panel. I wonder what the panel decided. But they're not going to tell you that little detail, that the panel was a kangaroo court. And it'd be like, yeah. So they convened a panel of a bunch of people who were opposed to it, and they decided that they were opposed to it. The American Psychological Association convened the Task Force Appropriate Therapeutic Response to Sexual Orientation. The task force conducted a systematic review of peer-reviewed journal literature on sexual orientation change and issued a report in 2009. The task force concluded that the sexual orientation change efforts can pose certain health risks to lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, including confusion, depression, guilt, helplessness, hopelessness, shame, social withdrawal, suicidality, substance abuse, stress, disappointment, self-blame, decreased self-esteem, authenticity to others, increased self-hatred, hostility, and blame towards parents, feelings of anger and betrayal, loss of friends and potential romantic partners, problems in sexual and emotional intimacy, sexual dysfunction, high-risk sexual behaviors, a feeling of being dehumanized and untrue with self, a loss of faith, and a sense of having wasted time and resources. Let's dig into that report a little bit deeper, the 2009 report. All right. For example, future laws might all right. Where was it going from? All right, so American. This is where I'm going to go for what the AP actually dug into. So, in The Therapist, this is reviewing that very report, in The Therapist, by Dr. Catherine Atkins, and Legislative Update in The Therapist, October 2014, Volume 42, a number of potential and unintended... Oh, that's the wrong one. Oh, sorry. Responding to the Lew's statement is where this comes up. Who compared harms like drinking and alcohol, which ironically are closely associated with the actual lifestyle being mandated. Right? You're not allowed to seek anything other than this lifestyle. All right, so opponents were quick to respond to Lew's statement. They reported the keyword searches in primary psychological and medical databases located thousands of research articles concerning youth, minors, adolescent children, and alcohol cigarette use, but only 4 articles in minor adolescent children and sexual orientation change efforts or conversion therapy, reorientation therapy, reparative therapy. See the Alliance analysis of the SOCE ban legislation. Theraputicchoice.com, analysis of anti-SOCE legislation. 3 of the 4 of these were case studies, which are not clinical studies. They're people's stories. All right, one of which appeared to be supportive of this structure. The only research article somewhat related to the issue was that of Shidlow and Schroeder in 2002, after the first cited, the APA's first cited ban. Strangely enough, all the research was done after they already came out about the position. Majorly scientifically reliable. Okay, so I'm going to continue going through with the bill. The APA Association issued a resolution to the appropriate affirmative responses to sexual orientation, distress, and change efforts in 2009, stating the APA advises parents, guardians, young people, and their families to avoid SOCE change efforts that portray homosexuality as mental illness or developmental order, and to seek psychotherapy, social support, education services that provide accurate information on sexual orientation and sexuality, increased family and school and support, and reduce rejection of sexual minority youth. They wow. That's such horse crap. It's not even hard to get. It's hard to get into. For countervailing, for a countervailing response, you could actually go to, for example, therapeuticchoice.com's Journal of Human Sexuality, which has a rebuttal to that study, which, unlike that particular statement, actually looked at both sides of the issue and provides clinical research links, again, which the APA study does not do. All right, so D, there's another quote. Another quote. So there's, the law itself is, all right, there's about 2 pages of cherry-picked data in this law. I'm not going to read it all. I don't have time. I have better things to do. They're only citing advocates for the LGBTQ community. They include no references to any countervailing practices. The hypocritical level of cherry-picking is best in Section D, which just goes to the 2000 statement. Anecdotal reports of cures are counterbalanced by anecdotal claims of psychological harm. So there's people on both sides of this issue, therefore one side of the issue is wrong. Literally, statement D in this law is, because there's people who have given anecdotal evidence on both sides, one side is not evidence and is not science. Chew on that for a little bit, folks. Think about it. All right, so to clarify what is and is not covered under this bill, let's go to subsection P. Courts, including in California, have recognized the practice of sexual orientation change efforts as a commercial service. Therefore, claims that sexual orientation change efforts are effective in changing an individual's sexual orientation may constitute unlawful, unfair, or fraudulent business practices under state consumer protection laws. This bill intends to make clear that sexual orientation change efforts are an unlawful practice under California's Consumer Legal Remedies Act. So it covers all of it. It covers churches, it covers nonprofits, it covers licensed practicing clinicians. They specifically updated this law from the first draft to include anybody, right? So I'm illegal in California because if you come to me, I'm going to lead you to the KEYS program. We're going, and we can start working on any issues that involve same-sex attractions, minor attractions, or transsexual identity stuff, because this mostly we find it is about the same thing, right? Very similar issues are involved in all three. And so the things that help people with one of those issues, it tends to help people with all three. All right. California has compelling interest in protecting it. All right. So as this section 2, section 1761 of the Civil Code is amended to read 1761 as used in this title. Goods means tangible chattels bought or leased through use primarily for personal, family, or household purposes, including certificates or coupons, including goods at the time of the sale are to be fixed to a real property to become part of a real property, whether or not they're suitable. Services means work, labor, and or services for other than commercial or business use, including services furnished in connection with sale or repair of goods. So you don't actually have to be selling it, right? Which is another lie that if you go to Snopes, they're going to lie and say it's only for professionals, it's only about paying things. Except in section B, in section 2, subsection B, services has no mention of financial transaction. That's the rest of it is just legal definitions, and there's again more of them that I can list. When I've got this posted, I'm going to upload it. Essentially, California has banned advertising, offering, or talking about sexual orientation change efforts in their country, right? And that goes against good psychological practices because nope, sorry. Again, to go to so Vince Russo says ban gays. That's completely unbiblical, right? I'm here to give the Christian response. One, you might want to check out First John chapter 4, which says if anybody says I love God but hates his brother is a liar, because no one can hate his brother whom he has seen and love God whom he has not seen. And we have been given this commandment. You should love one another. So anytime you stand up and start shouting hate at somebody, you've already left Christianity behind. Because our commandment is to love our neighbors and as ourselves. And there's no qualifier on that. Oh, well, but my neighbor's doing something I think is wrong. Okay, love them. Go to, check out Romans chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, which says, you hypocrites, when you're pointing fingers at other people, when you're doing the same thing, do you think you're going to get away with it from God? Instead, shouldn't you be showing the same patience and kindness that God showed you that led you to repentance? It's a bit of a paraphrase, but now I'm not going to look up my Bible just for somebody who wants to drop hate. Nope. If you think that homosexual activity and gay love is wrong, then I challenge you, go love them better, right? If you think that homosexual activity is a counterfeit love, go show the proper one. If you think that homosexual agenda is a wrong one, get enough of a relationship with somebody that you can share God's word and God's truth. It's the only way you're going to get to go forward. So I've covered the main points of the Assembly bill. I'm going to put the link in the description. I've got other people texting me to get some other stuff done tonight. I will continue to look at comments below. Okay, so some closing points. Why this is really bad law and why this is immoral. One, you're taking away people's rights for self-determination, all right? If somebody has homosexual feelings and they have another moral value, and guess what? You don't get to judge their other moral value. Whether they are getting their moral values from their culture, whether they're getting their moral values from religion, whether they're getting their moral values from rereading Ulysses 15 times on Amtrak, you don't get to judge which of their moral values has value to them. That's their right as a human being. And so when you pass a legislation that says they're not allowed to pursue a resolution between their moral values and their feelings and issues, you're taking away their freedom to determine who they are as an individual. If you're willing to do this, say the minor, if you're willing to go for the minor, the ban on SOCE therapy to minors, you think that's a really great law. All right, so if you can ban, the minor consent laws, legal precedents, how would you feel if we turned around and used that to make sure that nobody could get an abortion, get any birth control, nobody can get an abortion or get any birth control under the age of 18 because they don't have the same right to consent, right? This legal precedent is really shitty and can cut both ways really fast. Never before in the history of Western civilization, never before in the history of America has a legislature completely come out and bashed and forbidden a pursuit of therapy. If you want a lack of clinical research, I can get behind you and we can go to start banning chiropractors or people selling essential oils, but this is not about therapeutic practices that don't have clinical backgrounds. This is about a political agenda and only about a political agenda. Mostly it's about a hatred towards a religion. All right. Another problem, and this was brought up by the American Pediatric Association on forbidding sexual orientation change bans, is it's very common for minor victims, minor survivors of sexual abuse, to have unwanted homosexual feelings. The process that produces this is called sexual imprinting. Basically, this is a perfectly normal mammalian response that your brain makes a map of the first person you have sexual contact with, and thereafter carries that map that this is what is sexually exciting. If you're waiting till you're married and the first time you have sex with your wife, then this is a really neat mechanism, because for the rest of your life, whatever your wife looks like, you're going to think she's the most attractive person on the face of the planet, which could lead to some really happy marriage issues that I'm not going to talk about right here, right? But if you're a minor who's been sexually abused and you have sexual identity issues that have been inflicted upon you by a criminal, this law forbids you from doing anything but embracing them. No, you're not allowed to ask for any help, and you're allowed to get any help with those aspects of your survivor issues from from being a survivor of sexual abuse. Okay, now that's really scummy. That's really shitty, and that's and there's no exemption in the law for that. Right? The only legal thing now in California, if you have a minor who's been molested and comes to you and says, "Now I have these sexual feelings that I don't want," it is now illegal for you to go to look at any of the techniques which other people have used to find reconciliations from their unrepented, for their unwanted homosexual feelings. Right? So you're preventing help for child abuse. You're undermining critical, and more so for your side than my side, political requirement, political, legal precedents, in the healthcare industry, which can backfire, right? And you're denying you're denying people their right to self-determination, which is a fundamental human right. So because of those three things, leaving aside the whole, imprisoning Christians thing, which, progressives love to do, and they've done in Canada and they've done in Britain now, where if you even read the wrong Bible verse out loud in public, whether or not anybody present objects, pastors can and have been jailed. And I'm not talking about the Westboro Baptist chipmunks, right? I've been picketed by Jerry Falwell. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about mainstream biblical Christianity, just a random street preacher, right? And if you want, I can give you citations to those actual cases in Canada and in the United Kingdom, right? So this is not Scotland, London, and I want to say Ontario are the three cases that come to mind like that. So this kind of legislation has already been used to imprison Christians. So the argument, oh well, it's not, doesn't mean that, bullshit. It already is being used to do that. In the UK, there have been foster parents. There's a pair of foster parents. I want to say it was in Somerset, that were stripped of their role as foster parents according to the states because they were traditional Christians. And the court decided that there was a chance that they could eventually be fostering an LGBTQ person who might be offended. And so they were kicked out of the foster program, right? So when you see this big knee-jerk response from the Christian right, it's why, right? It's not, this law crosses the line between advocating for tolerance, which I'm a complete advocate of if you didn't just see me smack a homophobe earlier on this video. But it is a straight-out attack on Christianity, and it's an attack on traditional values. It's an attack on people's ability to choose for themselves what values are important to them. It's an attack on good science, because the anti-SOCE science, the SOCE results are pretty mixed. You get about, when you really start digging into the clinical results, you get about 1/3 of the people who have no apparent change in their feelings. You have about 1/3 of the people who have moderate change in their emotions and attractions. You have about 1/3 of the people who have these wild success stories, and those are the ones that like the Baptists are running around, throwing up on walls and making on posters. And I don't really do that, right? I don't like to talk about people that I know and people in my life who have been part of this movement on both sides. I prefer to just talk about Jesus and about God's word, because that doesn't change. The culture changes, God's word doesn't change. Societies, kingdoms rise and fall. God's word doesn't change. What's right and wrong doesn't change. So, so another thing that I wanted to read to you really quick in closing, while I was doing research for this, I came across licensed California therapist Dr. Laura Hynes in a 2017 article. Gives some really interesting analysis on what else the APA does, the statements the APA has given. These are quotations out of the APA handbook. So I'll provide a link to her research in the description below when I get this done. So the APA handbook states, quote, "Research on sexual minorities has long documented that many recall having undergone notable shifts in their patterns of sexual attractions, behaviors, or orientation identities over time." Diamond, 2014, APA Handbook, Volume 1, page 636. The APA Handbook reviews a highly regarded study by gay researcher Savin Williams and colleagues Savin Williams, Joyner, and Rieger, 2012, Rosario and Scrimshaw, 2014, APA Handbook, Volume 1, page 562. That followed the sexual identity of young adult participants when most were ages 18 through 24 and again at ages 24 through 34, about 6 years later. Participants indicated that whether their sexual identity was heterosexual, mostly heterosexual, bisexual, mostly homosexual, or homosexual. The bisexual group was larger than exclusively gay and lesbian groups combined, but the largest identity group, second only to heterosexual, was the, quote, mostly heterosexual for each sex and across both age groups, and that age group was, quote, larger than all the other non-heterosexual identities combined. Savin-Williams et al., 2012 abstract. Quote, the bisexual category was the most unstable, with 3/4 changing that status in 6 years, abstract, emphasis added. Over time, more bisexual and mostly heterosexual identified young adults of both sexes moved towards heterosexuality than towards homosexuality, page 106. Similar change is found in other population-based longitudinal studies. The rates of change do not appear to decline as participants get older. So for both sexes, a heterosexual sexual orientation identity was the most stable. Savin-Williams, 2012, page 104. As Diamond reports is true in all of these large-scale perspectives, APA on Sexual Orientation, Laura Hynes, Longitudinal Studies, 2014, the APA Handbook, Volume 1, page 634. Savin-Williams and colleagues reported, quote, in our study, when shifts occur in sexual orientation identity, most were to an adjacent identity category, Savin-Williams, 2012. Spontaneous change from 100% homosexual identity to 100% heterosexual identity seldom occurred. Again, quote, when most heterosexual women and men shifted over time, it was primarily to and from the 100% heterosexual category, end quote, page 109. A shift to one or more adjacent categories in the direction towards heterosexuality can make a desired goal of chastity easier for some, and a goal of having a gender complementary relationship may become more or entirely possible. Dr. Laura Hynes, 2017, it's from the website therapyequality.org, and the APA on Sexuality by Dr. Laura Hynes. Right, so this isn't just some random Bible-thunking nerd. Right, there are clinical psychologists who are really protesting this movement, and if you give me more specifics, I can give you more specific links. So this law is bad. It's immoral on secular levels. It's immoral on psychological levels. There's no doubt it's immoral on religious levels. It's bad law. It's bad ethics. It's bad psychology. It's bad legal precedent, right? Because once the law, right, once a group of legislation, almost 80 to 17, comprised of one political party. Do you want to live in a country where, as long as there's a political majority, they can tell you what therapy you're allowed to get and what advice you're allowed to get? So let's flip this on its side and you tell me whether this is a good law. All right. So in Utah, which is almost exclusively Republican, religious, and conservative, if they pass a law that banning all LGBTQ activities, right? You weren't allowed to refer to it. You weren't allowed to refer to PFLAG. You weren't allowed to give people websites to like the one I just did, which was from medical advocates for gay and lesbian people. Right? You're not allowed to hand out any of that. How would you like that law? Not so much. Well, if you don't like that law, maybe this is a bad law. And here's the other problem, right? Setting a precedent. Once you establish the stakes, right? This is part of a culture war, but the culture war is setting stakes. In the 90s, 2000, right? Around the end of 2000, around 2010, there was a big shift, right? Where people, most conservatives now are willing to accept gay marriage, right? By polls. That's a big shift. But if you want to politically make it this us versus them fight to the death, it's not really a good idea. Right? The numbers are not good. When a majority, when a tiny minority, and pretty much the LGBTQ population, best and most recent studies that I've looked at, 1.5 to 2.5%, 1.5 to 3.5%, percentage of the population is going to say to 98, 96% of the population, we're going to outlaw your lifestyle if we have power. What do you think they're going to do? Really, just human nature. I don't care what politic it is, right? You have a 3% minority wanting to outlaw the point of view of 50 or 60% of the population. You think this is a really great idea? What if they start hitting back? I'm for tolerance on both sides of this issue, but genuine tolerance, where people who are religious are allowed to be religious and people who are anti-religious are allowed to be anti-religious, where people who want to live a homosexual lifestyle are allowed to, and people who don't want to be part of the homosexual lifestyle are also allowed to. So that's my take on it. I've read the salient portions of the law. I'm going to go do something that doesn't depress and piss me off. Thank you for watching.